Albert Einstein had one simple, final wish. He wanted his body to be cremated and his ashes scattered in secret. The reason for the wish is almost more interesting than the wish itself. He hoped to prevent his remains from becoming relics, to stop people from, as it's been paraphrased, coming to worship at my bones. But in the quiet of a Princeton hospital room, that wish was shattered by one man's decision. This is the story of that decision, and the strange 40-year journey of the most famous brain in the world. A journey that involves basements, car trunks, and for a time, 2 glass mason jars in a cider box. On April 18, 1955, Albert Einstein died at Princeton Hospital in New Jersey. The cause was a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. He was 76. As per his explicit instructions, his body was to be cremated. His family intended to see that wish honored, but they didn't account for Dr. Thomas Harvey. Harvey was the pathologist on call that morning, tasked with performing the autopsy to confirm the cause of death. Somewhere in that process, between determining that a burst aorta had ended Einstein's life and preparing the body, Harvey made a decision that would define his life and spark a bizarre, decades-long question. He saw the brain that had produced the theory of relativity, the one that had given us equal Tom C2. And in a moment he would later frame as a kind of scientific duty. He took it. He carefully removed the organ, placed it in a jar of formaldehyde, and the rest of Einstein's body was sent for cremation. His family was completely unaware. The secret, of course, did not last. When Einstein's son, Hans Albert, learned that his father's brain had been taken, he was furious. This was a direct violation of his father's wishes. But Thomas Harvey was persuasive. He wasn't a thief, he argued. He was a servant of science. This brain, he insisted, was a unique specimen. To destroy it, he suggested, would be a crime against progress. Reluctantly, and with few other options, Hans Albert gave a kind of retroactive blessing on the condition that the research be published in reputable journals. The damage, however, was done. Princeton Hospital, facing a controversy, demanded Harvey return the brain. When he refused, his position at the hospital became untenable and he left. So Harvey took the brain and went to a lab at the University of Pennsylvania. There, he had it photographed from every angle before having it professionally sectioned into approximately 240 blocks, each encased in a hard material called celluloid. Thousands of microscopic slides were prepared. Dr. Harvey now possessed a library of genius, and his long, strange journey was about to begin. The decades that followed read less like a scientific endeavor and more like a forgotten road trip movie. Harvey's career, once promising, began to unravel. He lost his job and his marriage and began a nomadic journey across the American Midwest, all the while carting around the most famous brain in history. The stories from this period are almost too strange to believe. For years, the brain blocks were stored in 2 large mason jars, hidden inside a cardboard cider box. At one point, that box was stashed under a beer cooler in a lab where Harvey worked in Wichita, Kansas. He drove it across the country, with the jars sometimes just sitting in the trunk of his car. Harvey's obsession with the brain became his life's defining feature, but also its curse. His professional life declined. He lost his medical license in 1988 after failing a 3-day competency exam in Missouri. To make ends meet, the man guarding the secrets of genius found himself working on an assembly line in a Kansas plastics factory. Through it all, he held on to the brain. He would occasionally send a slide to a curious researcher, but he published no major studies himself. The grand project he had promised had devolved into a lonely 40-year guardianship, with the brain of a titan as his only constant companion. For over 20 years, Harvey and his precious cargo fell into obscurity. Then, in 1978, a journalist named Stephen Levy finally tracked him down to Kansas. After pressing the quiet, unassuming doctor about what happened to the brain, Harvey admitted it was with him right there in the office. He walked over to a stack of boxes, pulled out a cardboard box labeled Costa Cider, and opened it. Inside were 2 large glass jars, floating in a yellowing fluid. Harvey reached in, pulled out a piece, and confirmed for Levy that this was it. The brain of Albert Einstein had been hiding in a cider box all along. This story is a maze of ethical questions and unbelievable twists. If you find this kind of historical puzzle as fascinating as I do, take a second to hit that subscribe button. We dive into these kinds of stories from history and science every week, and you won't want to miss what's next. Levy's article brought the story back into the light, and the scientific community once again took notice. So, what did they find? Was there anything physically unusual about Einstein's brain? The results have always been tantalizing, but they resist simple conclusions. One of the first studies, published in 1985 by Marion Diamond, found that Einstein's brain had a higher than average ratio of glial cells to neurons in a specific area, associated with synthesizing information. Glial cells are the support staff of the brain. The thinking was that, perhaps, Einstein's brain had more resources to power his intense cognition. Another study in 1999, which used Harvey's original photographs, noted that Einstein's parietal lobes regions associated with mathematical ability and visuospatial reasoning were about 15% wider than average. They also appeared to be shaped differently, lacking a common crease. This led to speculation that the different structure may have allowed more neurons in that region to connect and communicate more effectively. But these are findings from a single extraordinary brain. It's impossible to say for certain if these anomalies were the source of his genius, or just random quirks of his anatomy. As the 20th century came to a close, Thomas Harvey's peculiar odyssey was also nearing its end. In 1998, 43 years after he first took it, Harvey drove back to Princeton and returned what remained of the brain to the University Medical Center. His decades-long guardianship was over. Thomas Harvey passed away in 2007. He remains an enigmatic figure, a man who claimed he never regretted his decision and saw himself as the protector of a priceless artifact. Today, the remains of Einstein's brain are scattered but safe. Many of the blocks and slides are back at Princeton, available for researchers. Another significant portion, including 46 paper-thin slices on microscope slides, are on public display at the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. The story of the Einstein brain heist is more than just a bizarre medical tale. It's a story about obsession, the blurry line between scientific inquiry and personal ambition, and our collective fascination with the nature of genius. In the end, the heist failed to unlock the secret of what made Einstein, Einstein. His genius wasn't something that could be sliced, stained, and put under a microscope. It was a storm of curiosity, imagination, and intellect that once lived inside that now hallowed gray matter. The brain is a relic in a jar. The legacy of its thoughts remains boundless.